If you've got a Bible and you like following along, please turn in it to Luke chapter 24. This is where we will spend our time. I mean, this is just a common phenomenon, and it's been this way all my life. I don't know how many Easter messages I listened to growing up that were probably good ones. And I walked away unchanged. It didn't bother me. Carry on with life, forget about it. It was just another Sunday. I know there were lots of decorations and things like that in the church. I didn't want to be there anyway, so it didn't matter. And I just went home as I had come in, lost. And that shouldn't be any surprise, really, because in the end, it's not a matter of how well the message is contrived or how well it's delivered or the decorations or anything else. If God's Spirit doesn't pierce the heart, if the person's not wanting God, then the Easter messages can come and go just like any other message and have no effect whatsoever. But the problem with Easter, as I see it, is you're talking about something that, at least as far as I can see, I can't think of anything more cataclysmic in human history than somebody who's been buried for 3 days, pronounced dead by the people who are professional killers, the Roman people that crucified the soldiers. That's what they did for a living. So for them, there was no question that if you got put up there, you weren't coming down from it alive. Did you know in Roman history, I could only find one person who actually was crucified and came off the cross alive, but that was because Caesar had him pulled down. That's the only person that ever lived through it. So they were batting 1,000 when it came to crucifixions. They knew what they were doing, and so the crucifixion, but the reason I harp on this is because the crucifixion's not the big deal. The Romans crucified hundreds of thousands of people. We know of at least 2 others on that day, but that's just in Judea, right? The Roman Empire is a big place. There might have been 100 people crucified on Easter Sunday on that day, on Good Friday, I should say, on that day. And yet, what happened on the 3rd day is what makes the difference. So let's take a look at this text and see what it would show us in this way of thinking. I'll begin reading in Luke 24, verse 13, if you want to follow. Now that very day, this is that day, 2 of them were on their way to a village called Emmaus, out of Jerusalem, which was about a 7-mile journey. And they were talking to each other about all the things that had happened. And while they were talking and debating these things, Jesus himself approached and began to accompany them on their trip, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. So Jesus said to them, "What are these matters you're discussing so intently as you walk along?" And they stood still, looking back at him sadly. One of them, named Clopas, said, I like the way he says this, "Are you the only visitor in Jerusalem who doesn't know what has happened in these days?" I like that question. So Jesus said to them, "What things?" "Well, the things concerning Jesus the Nazarene," they replied, "a person who was powerful in his deeds, his words. He proved to be a prophet before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was going to be the one who was going to redeem Israel. And not only this, but now it's the 3rd day since these things have happened. Furthermore, some of our women in our group amazed us when they were at the tomb early this morning, and they didn't find his body there. They came back and said they'd seen a vision of angels who had said Jesus was alive. Then some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it exactly as the women had said it was, but they didn't see Jesus." So Jesus said to them, "You foolish people, how slow of heart to believe all the prophets have spoken. Wasn't it necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and to enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus interpreted to them all the things written about himself and in all the scriptures. And so they approached the village where they were going. And Jesus acted as he wanted to go on further. But they urged him. They said, "Stay with us. It's coming toward evening and the day is almost done." And so Jesus went in to stay with them. When he had taken his place at the table with them, he took the bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to each of them. And at this point their eyes were opened and they recognized who he was. And then he disappeared from their sight. They said to each other, "Didn't our hearts burn in us while he was speaking to us on the road?" while he was explaining the scriptures to us. So they got up that very hour and they returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and those who were gathered together with them. And they said, the Lord has really risen and has appeared to Simon. So Clopas and his wife told what had happened on the road and how they had recognized Jesus when he broke the bread. So here we've got a description of some pretty amazing events. And you'd think that a person who glances even at the gospel has to at least entertain a thought as to whether or not these things have actually occurred in history. I think that's a reasonable question. I mean, unless a person's just going to read it like Aladdin or something like that, they've got to at least say, wow, I wonder if this happened. You've got the events that are recorded. You've got the arrest. You've got the trials. You've got the scourging. You've got the crucifixion as it takes place when Jesus says to those who have their power over him, the hour and power of darkness are yours. He's making a declaration about what's going on. But you know what's fascinating to me about this, beyond all of the facts? Jesus didn't do any of this stuff in secret. This was all public. There were people around, people who saw all of these things take place as they took place. They were totally aware of what was being said. They were aware of what was happening. Then you've got this scourging, which was public. If you read the accounts of the scourging, he was scourged before a crowd. So, and scourging, by the way, the Romans called it halfway death. You know why? Because about half of them that got scourged died. Because in that scourging, because of the way the lictor's whip was arranged with the pieces of metal and bone in the whip, it literally just cut into your skin. And as the skin got pulled away sufficiently, think about a body covered from head to toe with those kinds of cuts. And then think about the fact that some people, the musculature around their abdomen would be torn so, if the lictor happened to concentrate on that area, such that their intestines would be showing. And think about it being the first century. Now, if you take somebody who's injured like that to even Waycross Hospital or Homerville Hospital, chances are they might live because of all the antiseptic quality of medicine that we can bring to a person who is that injured. They might live. I mean, think about what open heart surgery is. You know, it's like if you were in the medieval time and you were in a battle and your heart was opened up like that, you weren't going to live. But we cut people's chest open like that now to save their life. Well, this is the first century in Judea. They didn't have any access to any of that. So Jesus could have easily died from a dozen things before they ever even put him on the cross. But certainly after a few days, if he were left untreated, he would have died likely anyhow. That's very significant. And then you've got him nailed to a cross with two other people on that particular day. But it's not a significant event. I'm just going to say that out loud. Think about it now. Try, if you can, to set aside what we know to be true about this day, if you can. And think about it in terms of encountering these facts for the first time. So, somebody got crucified. Well, they did that all the time in the Roman Empire. For them, it was just business as usual. So, if this is all true, and I believe it is, then the only thing that's significant about it is what happens after Jesus is crucified. That's the significant portion. So I'm going to make a declaration today. I'm going to say, in as far as I can tell, I know you all believe this, so just try to track with me here as we go through it like we've never heard it before. I'm going to say it looks to me like historically it actually happened, that he was crucified. I'm going to say that looks very likely to be the case because you've got some Roman historians who come a few decades after all this who declare it. They say these Christians seem to believe that this guy we crucified on a cross is somehow alive. They're not saying that because it didn't happen. These Romans have no interest in declaring any of this. They're just recording what's being said. So then you've got that. Now you've got the environment in which it takes place. It's in a dual-pronged environment. One environment is Judea, Jewish. That's the first environment. But that environment is contained within a Roman environment. So you've got two things going on culturally that have a lot to do with what this day actually came to be and why it came to be as it was. It is no accident that it's taking place when and where it does, if you think about it for just a minute. We'll get into that in just a moment. But what got Jesus in trouble was the stuff he said. That's what got him in trouble. Here's what he said. I'm going to just give you a list of a few of them. My words will never pass away. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words won't. Now, if you're Jewish, what does that mean? If you're Jewish, that means it's God. The only words that don't pass away for the Jew are the Torah and the Tanakh. That is, the Torah, the sayings, and the prophets. Those words are eternal words. So if Jesus' words are eternal words, this is the maker of the law. This is the maker of the universe giving those words. Otherwise, what is he talking about? My words won't pass away. I and the Father are one. They picked up rocks right away when he said it. Why do you stone me for many good works I've shown you? Which one of those are you stoning me for? Not for good works, but because you, being a mere man, have blasphemed, claiming yourself to be God. Destroy this temple, in 3 days I'll raise it up. Well, the temple took nearly 50 years to build. What are you talking about? You're going to raise the temple up in 3 days. Before Abraham was, and this one's just, to me, the most startling, in front of a Jewish crowd with plenty of educated Jews, Jesus says, before Abraham was, ego eimi, I am. So he takes the word out of the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which is what they used in all the synagogues nearly throughout Judea. People didn't speak Hebrew. They didn't speak Aramaic anymore. They may speak it, but they couldn't read it, most of them. And so when you went to a Jewish synagogue, it's just like us today. We have a translation in English. They had a translation in Greek because that was the common language that everybody spoke. So if you're going to read from the Torah, you're going to read from the Tanakh, you're going to read a Greek version of it. And so it would say, when Moses stood before the bush and he said, look, God, what am I going to tell them when I go back to Israel that somebody has sent me to be the deliverer? And God says, ego eimi ho'on, I am the being. That's my name. That's who I am. You go tell them that I am has sent you to be the deliverer of Israel. He takes that name right in front of all this Jewish crowd, says, before Abraham was, I am. You're not yet 50 years old. You've seen Abraham. Before Abraham was, I am. Man, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and nobody's going to come to God except through me. To a Jewish crowd. That's the Jewish crowd. What about the Roman crowd? Well, the Roman crowd is even worse in some respects, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Now, these assertions that Jesus makes here are reasonable in one condition. Only one condition. That is that they're actually true. Otherwise, this is crazy talk. I mean, what if I said that? You know, we've got people in our history here recently that have said things like that. David Koresh said that. Sun Myung Moon has said that. Lots of people have said things like this. What makes Jesus' sayings impactful, believable, and significant in history? Because others had said things like this before Jesus in Judea. People followed them. The Romans took care of that too. People would say it. Jesus said, and there'll be some who'll come after me who'll say things like this. Don't follow after them. So Jesus is separating himself from everybody. Well, the difference is he actually proved that what he was saying was true. He proved it in the most startling way. Paul says this to the church at Rome. If Jesus is the Son of God in power by resurrection from the dead. So what's the implication? If he doesn't come back from the tomb, he's not the Son of God. Period. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15 that if Jesus isn't raised, we're the most miserable people on the planet because we've been lied to. That he's not alive. And so he hangs the whole coat of everything we believe on this slender little thread of Jesus being actually raised from the dead in time and space. How does that impact humanity? Well, if any of these things aren't true, then none of it's true. If Jesus didn't come back from the tomb, none of this matters. None of it. This church doesn't matter. I don't matter. This Bible doesn't matter. The declarations we're making don't matter. None of it. Easter, you might as well go out and get the chocolate bunny because there's nothing to it if Jesus didn't come back from the tomb. Then there are people, and so you can see, I think, maybe I'm crazy, but I can see why people would be so zealous to take today and tie it to something beyond this resurrection. Let's tie it to anything but that, because if that's what it's tied to, then all this stuff is true and we're in trouble. We're sunk. If we don't believe what he said we need to believe, we're sunk. So look at some of the denials. The first one is right there in the Bible, Matthew's gospel. He says, here's what the Jewish officials told the guards. It was a temple guard. People think it was Romans. It was actually a temple guard that was posted at the gravesite. Okay, the temple guard, the tomb's empty. And what are we going to do now? We've told everybody this guy's not the Messiah, and he's not in the hole. Here's what we do. You say you fell asleep. And that the disciples came while you were sleeping, and they took the body. That clears the whole thing up. That was the first polemic. In other words, the first argument that's saying these things aren't true. There's a lot of problems there, though. I can think of many problems with that. I mean, why would people within 2 months of these events stand on the temple steps and declare that he's alive when what they're declaring is what Jesus got crucified for in the first place? I wouldn't do that if it weren't true. There's no way you'd get me up there to say any of that stuff. It's no accident that, and this is another feature of this, it's no accident that God became human in the Roman Empire. That's the second layer of environment that makes a huge difference. Why is that? There are coins struck. We have them. And on the coin it says, Caesar Augustus, Savior of the world. Caesar was deity. So if you even allowed yourself in a setting, a public setting, where there were Romans who could hear it, or there's some Jew who just has it in for you, who hears it, and you say Jesus is Lord, and the Romans get wind of it, you're going to stand in front of a tribunal, and you're going to have to either give assent to it or recant it, or they're going to kill you. You couldn't say anybody's Lord but Caesar. That's it. Then there's the theory that the Muslims have, and some others in our modern day have had, and that is that Jesus didn't really die. He didn't really die. He was hurt real bad, and it was a bad situation, but when they took him down, Joseph of Arimathea and some others secretly carted him off into the tomb, and there they ministered to him for 2 days, and then they marched him out as the risen Lord. Now that's a real theory. It was one given to us by a man named Venturini in the 17th century. And then some others have picked it up in the 20th century. They've written books and made lots of money. The Passover Plot was written in the 60s and 70s by Hugh J. Schoenfield, supposedly a biblical scholar. So he said that Jesus didn't die, but that they ministered to him in the cool of the tomb, and that he was able to then make his resurrection appearances. Now I want to stop and think about that for just a minute. Let's put it in the modern day. What possible ministrations could be delivered to somebody who's got a hole in each wrist, a hole through both ankles, and they're covered with wounds from being whipped just about to the point of death? Under the best medical conditions, could you march that person out and have people like Thomas fall down in front of them and say, "My Lord and my God"? I don't think so. I think if you saw that person walking, you'd say, "Oh, we need to get him back to the hospital right away." There's no way you could worship somebody like that as the risen Lord of creation. If he did revive in that way, would he inspire worship? I don't think so. Then you've got this idea, and by the way, the Bible says in Isaiah that he was unrecognizable. That's beaten pretty badly. Then you've got another idea today that is popular, has been for about 40 years now, that the whole thing's just a myth. Well, there are problems there too. One of the biggest problems is you've got Romans who wrote this stuff down after Jesus was long gone. When, as Pliny says, when this pernicious doctrine of this guy coming back from the grave alive has spread all over the Mediterranean. Where'd they get the idea? And further than that, what's so interesting to me about that is there is no other declaration made by anybody through that first century period as to how this happened. Not one. There's no other story. What's the story? God raised Jesus from the dead. It happened in time and space and history. There's no other story. So if Paul, who wrote, this is fascinating. I don't know if you're aware of this. Paul is the earliest writing we have in the New Testament. Did you know that? Paul travels he travels within 2 months. Paul is converted. Go back and read Acts 8 and 9. Paul is converted within weeks of the crucifixion and resurrection. Weeks. So here you've got a person early who then travels as a missionary early, within at most 14 years he's traveling as a missionary, who's declaring that Jesus is alive. How in the world would he go about declaring something like that if it were a myth? Why would he do that? Why would the four gospel writers take risk upon themselves in the Roman Empire writing these gospels and circulating them if it were not true? I can tell you right now, if I were taken before, let's just say that there's a group of people who declare that Bigfoot is alive. Okay. So, and then somehow laws get passed such that if you don't agree that Bigfoot's alive, they're going to put you in prison for the rest of your life or kill you. Either way is bad. I can tell you right now, I don't think there's a Bigfoot, but if they brought me before the tribunal, oh, Bigfoot, I had him over for breakfast yesterday. There is a Bigfoot. Yes, sir. There's no way I'm going to lie. I would lie about something that wasn't true, but there's no way I'm going to lie if it's going to cost me my life to lie. So if Jesus didn't come back from the tomb, they're lying. Would you want to go to prison or be killed for a lie? I don't think so. Liars aren't good martyrs, and martyrs aren't good liars. Lastly, here's the one that I think has the most teeth in it, and it's a very modern consideration. Jesus was raised spiritually. Not in a body, but spiritually. He's alive. I've heard preachers say this today. He's alive in all of our hearts. We just sang it. How do I know that he lives? Because he lives in my heart. Well, if he doesn't live in history, there's no point in having him live in your heart. Really, I mean, what's the point? You know, Bozo the Clown lives in my heart. I remember Bozo from when I was a child, watching, I don't even remember the name of it. There's some station out of Jacksonville that had Popeye cartoons in the afternoon that I used to watch because they only got 3 channels. And Bozo the Clown was the moderator of the Popeye cartoons with a crowd of kids sitting there. Bozo lives in my heart. I remember Bozo, don't you? Lots of things like that. But if Jesus didn't live in history, then him living in my heart doesn't mean anything at all. Think about that. Think about the fact of all the environmental pressures, the Jewish pressure, the Roman pressure, the fact that all these things happen in this time and space. God was not messing around. He did this because he knew that these pressures would further confirm the historicity of what it is that we believe. We've not believed in a vacuum. So, that's why Paul could stand in front of Agrippa arguing for his own life as he's on his way to Rome. And he says to Agrippa, and this is the Rip Snow translation of Acts 26, is it any big deal that God should raise the dead? No, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal at all. So what's the most plausible explanation? The most plausible is the one they had from the very beginning. God raised Jesus from the dead. We've seen him. We had breakfast with him on the beach. And then you've got poor old Thomas. Think about Thomas, the worst of all of them. Think about it. I would have been with Thomas. I got to tell you, the fact of this history is so important to me that if it's not historical, I would not believe it. That's the truth. If the history didn't stack up and give me sufficient reason to say these things are true, I couldn't say what I'm saying to you right now. I couldn't do it. Poor old Thomas. Think about it. He's a Jew. He's a Jew. And Jesus says to him, look, Thomas, here I am. I'm not a spirit. A spirit doesn't have flesh and bone as you see me have. Put your hand in my wrist. Put your hand in my side, and don't be unbelieving, but believe. And Thomas falls down in front of him and says, Ho kurios mu, ho theos mu. The Lord of me, the God of me. For a Jew, Jesus should have slapped him. That's the worst blasphemy you could possibly utter. Unless it's true. Unless it's true. All the arguments against all of this are nothing more than a means to seek to avoid the raw power of the history that's actually here. That's all they are. On the night that Jesus was betrayed, Just as he did with Clopas and his wife, he took the bread and he broke it. And he said, this bread represents my body broken for you. As often as you do this and eat this, do it in remembrance of me. And then he took the cup and he poured the wine and he said, this wine represents the new covenant in my blood for the remission of your sins. As often as you drink this, as often as you eat this, do this in remembrance of me. So if somebody would volunteer to do the bread or the wine, whichever you'd prefer, and then whenever you are ready, all of you who know Jesus, you come and we'll take communion and have the Lord's Supper here today and remember what happened on Friday and what happened today. Body broken for you, the blood of Christ shed for you